Between now and that is one of the great moments of celebration in the church. If you have put your trust in Jesus, if you are a follower of Jesus and you would like to be baptized, I'd love to talk to you about that. So run me down today after church, run me down this week. I'd like to do that. I'd like to talk to you. Next Sunday would be an opportune time because we're already going to be doing it and I've already got to change of clothes. So if I've got to change clothes for one, I'd love to baptize about 127 people. We're going to start in the book of John this morning. If you'd open up your Bibles and turn to John chapter 9. John chapter 9 is not really where I'm preaching from, but I want to give you a couple of verses to kind of lay the foundation. The next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at the book of Matthew, a great story that's very familiar to you. And we're going to bake in this story for a few weeks. But I want to set the table this morning in the book of John. So open up your Bibles and turn to John chapter 9. This is a weird thought to start. This is kind of a Buddhist or a Hindu thought. It's not exclusive to them because it shows up here in the Bible, which is the story of the Jewish people and the story of the Christian church. And it's also present in the world today, very kind of what we would consider in the West, what we would consider kind of a New Age thought. But it shows itself here in the book of John, John chapter 9, verse 1. As he went along, Jesus and his disciples, as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked Jesus, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Do you catch that? Do you see what's going on? There's a man who was born blind. He's blind. I don't know if the man is well, it says later on in the passage how old he is. But he's not a young man. He's not 9. He's not a teenager. This man was born blind. He didn't become blind because of some accident or some choice that he had. He was born blind. The disciples said, Jesus, tell us, who sinned? Past tense, ed, sinned. Who sinned? This man? Did this man sin to be born blind? Are you picking that up? In a past life is what they're saying. Or did this man's parents sin, and because of his parents' sin, their child was born blind? You know what that's called? Anybody? Karma. Karma. Are you familiar with karma? Okay. Anybody listen to like hippie, cool Beatles weirdness back in the 60s and 70s and get hooked up with your New Age vibes and all that kind of tree-hugging VW bus living? Yeah? Okay, here's karma. The belief that there is some cosmic law out there, some spiritual force that balances the scales. Okay? So if I was in a past life back in the 1700s someplace, if I was some axe murderer, I would be born in the next life with blind eyes or a mean wife, or my car would keep breaking down, or something bad would happen to me, because there's got to be some great balancing act in the universe. If you're really good in your past life, good things will happen. If you're really bad in your past life, bad things will happen. Or even not just past life, this life, but the scales are going to balance. I heard a Christian person say this one time. We Christians don't believe in karma, but we believe in what goes around comes around. No. That is not a Christian tenet. That is not, but it wasn't a Jewish tenet either. And these Jews, these Jewish followers of Jesus, these disciples said, ask Jesus, Jesus, this man was born blind. Who sinned, him or his parents? And later on in the story, in John chapter 9, actually the Pharisees bring that out as well. The Pharisees look at this man who was later healed by Jesus and said, "You were steeped in sin at birth." Jesus says no. Jesus says no. There is no cosmic justice. There is no great balancing of the scales out there in the universe. This is not a good representation of our faith in Jehovah God in the Old Testament, and it's certainly not a representation of the Christianity of the New Testament following of Jesus. The belief in karma is a belief system that hangs its hat on justice. If you do bad things will happen to you. If you do good things will happen to you. The belief in karma, I would say the false belief in karma, is a belief that hangs its hat on justice. We are Christian people. We follow the God revealed to us in the Bible. We believe in the God revealed in the person of Jesus. Folks, we are not karma people. We are grace people. Do you get that? Grace is the antithesis of karma. Grace says you do bad, bad things happen. You do good, good things happen. Jesus said, "Come to me." Yeah, you're a tax collector? Awesome. Come to me. You're a low-down, dirty dog sinner? Come to me. The book of Romans chapter 5, says this: God demonstrates His own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's not karma. That's grace. And we are grace people. We are hope people. We are love people. God allows things sometimes to happen to us because of choices and consequences. But folks, that's not karma. Okay? Sometimes people get rich. Sometimes people get rich. Sometimes they hit the lottery. And sometimes it's because they went off to college, got a finance degree, married a girl whose father owned a tax business. He inherited the family business and he became a bajillionaire. Sometimes people leave Monday morning prayer meeting and get into a car accident. Sometimes people leave the bar on Friday night and get into a car accident. That's not karma, that's choices and consequences often. There are times God allows things to happen in our lives for His purpose. It's not a choices and consequences, it's because God is doing something that we don't see yet, that we don't understand yet, that maybe we won't understand until it is all said and done, and that's the foundation that I want to lay for us as we go to the book of Matthew today. So if you would stand with me, turn to the book of Matthew, chapter 14. This is our text. We're going to be looking at this story for the next couple of weeks. It's one of those great, rich, thick stories that speaks on a lot of different levels. Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 22. After Jesus' cousin John had been murdered, Jesus tried to go away. Maybe just to rejuvenate, maybe to grieve. But the people knew where He was going and they flocked to Him. That's when Jesus fed the 5,000. Right after Jesus fed the 5,000, He sent them away and this story happens. Verse 22. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of Him to the other side while He dismissed the crowd. After He had dismissed them, He went up on a mountainside by Himself to pray. Later that night He was there alone, and the boat with the disciples, the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw Him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." There's that same line. We saw that last week in the Old Testament. Do not be afraid. "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. Then Peter got down out of the boat. He walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was terrified, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You have little faith," he said. "Why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. You can be seated. The disciples are in the storm. The storm is real. The storm is not a wee blow, okay? It's not it got a little windy. It's not the boat is gently rocking. Some of these disciples, at least 4 that we know of, so that's a third, math, right? 4 out of the 12, at least a third of these disciples are fishermen. They were experienced fishermen. They had been out on the lake before. They knew what a storm was. They knew when it was time to be afraid, and they were afraid. The storm is very real. The storm could be deadly. These fishermen would have known stories of other fellow fishermen who had gone out on the lake. Storms had risen up, and boats had capsized. Fishermen had lost their lives. These guys would have been familiar with that. They knew when to be afraid, and they were afraid. Elsewhere in the Gospels, it talks about how they cried out in fear. So they called out. It's unlikely that any of these guys would have been running around, "The sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling," the first time it got breezy. This storm was real. This storm was dire. This storm, you felt it. It wasn't imagined. It was real. Now, going back to our earlier talk about karma for a second. Keep this in mind. Sometimes the storms we find ourselves in are of our own choosing. Right? That's not karma. That's cause and effect. I've come to the end of the month and I can't pay my bills. Well, sometimes that's cause and effect. Sometimes that's because I blew all my bill money on beer, cigarettes, lottery tickets, and Twinkies. "Oh, I can't pay my bills, I can't pay my bills." Well, duh, math. Okay? Sometimes my storms are my own choosing. I've been a lousy husband, I've neglected my wife, and then she gives me papers, and I think, well, what did I do? Sometimes we find ourselves reaping what we have sown. But folks, sometimes we find ourselves in storms that are not of our doing. Okay? Keep your finger in Matthew chapter 14. Go back to John chapter 9 one more time. I want to read one more verse. Okay? So in John chapter 9, verse 1, we read this. "As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. The disciples asked Jesus, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' Jesus answered that question. I'm not sure we were really going to like the answer. But this is the answer. Jesus says this, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him." Now, do you get that? Can I be honest with you this morning? I don't like that answer. Thank you. I don't like that answer. I want things to always work out. If I've got to go through trouble, I want it to be because I went asking for it. I don't want bad things just to happen to me. Folks, we don't believe in karma. We don't believe in what goes around. We do believe in planting and harvesting. We do believe in choices and consequences. But this man was blind, not because he sinned, not because his parents sinned. Jesus says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. This happened to him. This is a real guy. This happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Now that's hard. That's a hard pill for us to swallow, because that shows us something. Folks, I think I've said this to you before, and I'm going to say it to you again this morning, and if God gives us enough time over the next 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years until I retire and sail off into the retirement years with all of our millions, I'm going to keep saying it. We are not the stars of our lives. The main character of my life, the main character of Rich Cook's life is not Rich Cook. It is Jesus. We are supporting actors in his story. And this man in John chapter 9, born blind, he had experienced a long life of blindness for God's purposes. That's not a distant, disinterested, detached God saying, oh, you know what, there's going to be a Thursday, one of these days Jesus is going to be walking past, and let's just make this guy blind for life so that Jesus can have a situation with him. That's not just the story. But God did this in this man's life so that he would be glorified, so that Jesus would be glorified, so that more people would be drawn to the star of this man's life, which was Jesus. And in Matthew chapter 14, these guys are in a storm, a dire storm, a fearsome storm. The disciples weren't in this storm because they were reckless. The disciples aren't in this dilemma because they were evil in a past life. Okay, Peter in a past life wasn't an axe murderer, so today he finds himself in a boat in the middle of the lake, and now it's time to be scared. It's not karma. Go back and look at Matthew 14, verse 22. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side. You know why the disciples are in the boat in the storm? Do you know? Do you know? Do you know? Because that's exactly where Jesus wanted them to be. This is a hard sermon, actually. Well, that's not fair at all. Well, who said anything about fair? Well, that's not good at all. Wait, your story's not over. Well, this isn't good for me. This isn't really right for me right now. In this season in my life, I really would rather not be in this storm. That all makes perfect sense if you're the star of your life. But I play a supporting role in the story of Jesus in the world. This whole scene starts out with the disciples being obedient. They're exactly where Jesus wants them to be. Do you get what that means? Do you get what that means? That sometimes the situations we find ourselves in, sometimes the storms that we find ourselves in, it's not because we've been reckless. It's not because we've been dumb. It's not because we've made bad choices. Sometimes the storms that we find ourselves in are because God is going to do something. We don't know the next chapter yet. God is working on us. God is working on those who are watching us. God is strengthening us for something that is coming up next. God is preparing us for what's going to happen a year from now or 10 years from now. God is working in my life because my boys are watching me. God is stretching you and working in you and taking you through a very difficult time because somebody else in this church family is going to be exactly where you are now. They're going to be where you are in a year, and they need to learn from you what a faithful follower of Jesus looks like. Folks, that's hard. This isn't a fun, feel-good, warm, oh, doesn't that just bless your heart sermon? It's not. Because folks today in here are going through storms that they didn't ask for. Their bodies are fighting them, and they didn't ask for this. You know, some people smoke for 50 years and then get cancer and then they cry, right? Now, I feel for them. But you can at least link choices and consequences. Some people get cancer and are gravely sick in their 30s, and they're CrossFit marathon runners. They're vegan and they don't eat anything with a face, right? They're very, very, very healthy. They drink lots of water. They take walks in the countryside. They're very, very healthy, and still hardships come. Sometimes we are stupid with money and we find ourselves in trouble. Sometimes we're brilliant and Dave Ramsey-ish with our money and financial difficulties come. See, we like it when it makes sense. Choices and consequences, planting and harvesting, or even karma. But we're not karma people. We don't believe in that. Sometimes, according to John chapter 9, it's not because of the choices we've made. It's not because we've sinned in some past life. It's not because the scales of justice are swinging back into place. Sometimes the situations we find ourselves in are because God is going to do something in your life. You don't know the last chapter yet. You don't know what's coming yet. You don't know how He's going to bring you through. It could be that it's for nobody else's benefit except yours. He's teaching you to trust Him. And I'll be the first to admit this morning that that's hard. That's hard. Don't assume because you're in a present storm that it's entirely negative. God is doing something. God's at work, and He loves you. See, that's what we can count on most. We don't serve a just God. If God was just, nobody would make it. The wages of sin is death. Hi, I'm Rich. And I'm a sinner. Saved by grace, but I'm a sinner. And you know what sin gets, according to the book of Romans? Death. We are not justice people. We are grace people. And God is at work. God is at work. So here's what I tell you as we start this look into Matthew chapter 14. I want you to swim in this. Swim. Bad choice of term. I want you to swim in this thought over the next few days, okay? If you find yourself in the middle of the storm today, if you are clutching onto the sides of the boat for dear life, if you are looking around and Jesus does not appear to be anywhere, it could be that God is working. God is doing something. One of the greatest tools of the enemy is to convince you that you're alone. And these disciples in the boat, they're facing the storm. And this isn't a gentle breeze. This isn't a light rocking of the boat. They are scared for their lives. They look around and Jesus is nowhere to be seen. What's the last they heard from Jesus? Hey fellas, get in the boat, go to the other side, I'm going to meet you there. That's the last they heard of Jesus. They get in the boat obediently. They start for the other side obediently. Now they're in big heap trouble. And where's Jesus? One of the greatest tools of the enemy is to convince you that He is not near you, He does not care for you, and He cannot rescue you. Folks, hang on. Hang on. I like when things make sense. Even when it's negative, that I can at least connect the dots. Okay, this happened because, were any of your, my dad was a good dude. My dad passed away in 2010. I wish you guys could have known him. He's a good dude. But he whooped the fire out of me back in the 70s and 80s. You know why? Because he was a big old meanie. Because I was asking for it. Because I deserved it. He was correcting my behavior. Sometimes my behavior needed to be corrected. I like when things, there were probably times when Dad looked at me and says, now do you know why I'm going to give you a whooping? And probably in my wonderful, little cherub, beautiful little angel of a baby face, I would have said, yes, Father, I know exactly why you're punishing me. I did wrong. I beseech you to forgive me. I like when things make sense. My body is broken because of this. My finances are a wreck because of this. The world around me doesn't make sense today because of this. That I can go to something and say, justice is alive in the world, karma is real, and if I do wrong, bad happens to me. If I do right, good happens to me. But we are not karma people. Sometimes things don't make sense. Sometimes God is at work. We just don't know what's coming yet. In the midst of the storm, folks, hang in there. Be faithful. Until he tells you what to do next, do what he told you to do last. And here's my cliffhanger for next week. You think you're alone. You think you're alone in this. My body is broken, my finances are wrecked, my marriage is in trouble, my kids are away, and the world around me is in trouble, and I'm just caught up in it, and you look around and you don't see Jesus. You think you're alone. That is a lie of the devil. So come back next week, and we'll talk about that. Would you stand up with me? I want us to pray together.